we have three guests here that I think you will find quite compelling. It was really a pivotal time in the United States, and we'll kind of walk through the history that led up to that. Let me do a quick introduction. First is Mark Nobilette. Mark really represents the pinnacle of craftsmanship and has done so for a long time. Of course, we have Tom Ritchey. And Tom, as you know, not only for the great bikes that he's built through the years, but also a lot of the other infrastructure that he's helped to build around cycling, components and other things like that have really made a huge difference to what we do with bicycles, not just mountain bikes, but road bikes and everything else. So we have Chris Chance, and Chris is also out of the 70s, and he's most famous for his business Fat Chance, which is really helped revolutionize the mountain bike world and really develop it into something much closer to what it is today. If you were even a bike racer in the 1950s, the only way you heard about bike racing was you might get a once-a-year report in what was known as the Isley Almanac. And the Isley Almanac would say, oh yeah, there was a Tour de France out there, and there was a Paris-Roubaix, and there was a winner to that whose name you probably can't pronounce, but it's there. There were only a few people who were actually wired in Europe. If you're familiar with the Chicago scene, there's a gentleman named, how many people know of Ted Ernst? Okay, Ted's an old-time Chicago, his dad's a German guy, so they were getting German publications, so they could stay in touch with racing. But in general, most people didn't have a clue about it. So what happened in the 60s is you started to see, I think it was in Northern California, I know the name of this publication.
Competitive cycling.
Well, no, we're even talking before that. This was 1960. This is the magazine that became Bicycling Magazine.
American Cycling.
There was American Cycling, and then there was another one. But anyway, Bicycling Magazine started to form, and they provided a little more regular news. And they struggled, and then by the time you get to, I think 71 is when Bellow was started.
Northeast Cycle News.
It was Cycle News originally.
No, it's
Cycle News, okay. So you started to get a flow of race information. It was not just about the little American amateur races. It was about the international racing scene. I think that excited a lot of people. And now what a lot of racers got to see is they got to see Europeans like Kobe and Mosier and Eddie Merckx and people like that start their own bike brands. That's got to get the hormones going. And I think we had a couple people for whom that applies. So let's get back to the story in Chicago and Albert Eisenkraut. This is Albert's late picture of Albert. And Albert he moved out to California. He learned from Oscar Watson, picked up things, and then I think he built his first factory out there, didn't he? His little shop out in Oakland?
Yeah, that's where his first shop was. Well, you know what? Actually, he built at Velosport bicycles at first.
And Velosport is?
Peter Ritch. Yeah, I'm not sure what year. Do you have any idea on that, Tom?
It was probably in the 70s.
70, yeah. Yeah. It was,
Peter Ritch initiated a tremendous amount of culture that happened for racing.
Okay.
Tour of California.
Can you hear that? Pete Ritch.
Peter Ritch was, if you kind of lived on the West Coast, he was probably your version of someone like Oshner,
Right.
or someone else on the East Coast. But a lot of Pete was a good racer himself in the 60s.
Yep.
And he ended up having a shop that was the counter shop to Spence Wolf's shop, which was Cupertino Bike Shop. So Cupertino Bike Shop was in my backyard down, of course, in Cupertino. and Velosport was in Berkeley at the top of I think it was Ashby. Anyway, right near the campus. But Peter had a tremendous influence on the culture because he also, after kind of his racing career, initiated the first Tour of California. And it was about that time that Mike Neal came in and a number of racers that were part of the NorCal
Sure.
group. But leading up to that, I'm I'm sure, I just am pulling things from my recesses, but I'm pretty sure that that was a couple of years before that him and Albert had a relationship that resulted
In the factory there.
in,
Yeah. Now, one of the first one of the things that Albert did is he turned not just into a frame builder, but also he started putting together frame building classes. And interestingly, his first class, I think his first class was actually in Chicago. And I had a chance to talk to one of the people who was there, Alan Fine, who was the owner of one of at the time in Chicago, the center of Chicago cycling was the center of cycling in downtown Chicago was a place called Touring Bicycle Co-op. They were sort of the hippie side. They were the left wing side. If you're in the northwest suburbs, you had Saugatuck Cycle, and I'm not sure who they had way out west, Lee Katz had decided that he wanted to stimulate frame building, and Albert wanted to teach frame building, and so they put together a class. They had space. They had multiple fixtures. They actually were equipped to do a class. They had like 7 or 8 people in there. Really nobody came out as a significant frame builder, but it started something, and he then brought it to California. And you, Mark, were at one of
the first class at Turin.
you were in the
Yeah, I
class?
was at Turin.
Really? Okay. And then you went out to California. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you. I'm going to ask you a little about what was it, because you actually joined Albert's business, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I worked for him for a year and a half.
Okay, well, tell us about your experience of working there.
Yeah, well, I was pretty green. I was 20 years old, had very little mechanical I worked as a bike mechanic, but I hadn't done any real machining or brazing or anything before I took the class. It went really well for me, and Albert liked what I did and hired me right after the class. I was at Turin. It was 2 weeks. It was morning sessions, afternoon sessions, lectures and demonstrations in between. And it was all in December, and I actually built my frame on Christmas Day, 1973.
Gave yourself a
That was my present. That was my present. Yeah.
Cool. And then you went to work for Albert.
And I worked,
Yeah,
right after that, a couple months later, I moved out to California and worked with Al. And yeah, it was, I survived it. Yeah, it
So
was
what was the
intimidating
shop
at times.
What was it? And now, what was it like working at the shop, and what sort of equipment did they have? I mean, what was it like actually trying to build a bike in those days?
Yeah, it was rough. We had really crude lugs, and Albert had hardly any tools, and so his files. It was a torch, his files. We had a belt sander, and had a lathe. I think that was all the only machine tool he had. He got the mill when I worked there. He got the mill later, and then gradually built up his equipment.
Okay, what year is this?
This was I started there in '74, February '74. I worked through summer of '75, and when I went there, first there, we had 2. It was Dave Brink and another guy named Fred Wilkie. And
Now, how did they get the frames painted?
Albert painted them all.
Really?
Yeah, he had a paint booth there.
Multi-talented.
Yeah, it wasn't a huge deal to paint bikes back then because you didn't put clear coats on them. It was just, it was primer and it was paint, and you put decals on it. Well, it was Emerald. So, it was durable and all. Yeah, but, it's not like today where it was multiple colors and clear coats. Tons of masking and stuff.
And
Pardon? Eisenhower?
Yep.
Yeah. And when I was working there toward the end of my tenure there, he started
Bruce Gordon join them?
Actually, Bruce joined after the second class,
Mm-hmm.
which was just a couple months after I went out there, and yeah, I guess he had been schmoozing with Dal, and I went away to the Worlds in '74 for a month, and when I got back, he was my boss. Bruce was my boss.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was kind of tough.
Richard, he also had a class in DC with 5 students.
Oh, he did?
Yep.
Okay.
Georgetown
Yeah,
Cycle.
yeah, he had another class while I was working with him in Texas too, I believe, and then he had a bunch of other classes.
So he turned that into quite an industry.
Yeah.
Well, now, who are some of the notable graduates that you know about?
Well, Bruce, of course. Yeah, well, there's a guy named Sam Braxton,
Oh,
There was a
Mr.
guy named
Turing,
Rob
yeah.
building
Harwood.
up in Mount,
Montana,
and,
Harwood.
Gilmore, Ian Gilmore.
right down in Tucson?
No, I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty sure Bernie, self-taught.
Yeah, Bernie probably is, he doesn't learn. He learns from himself reason.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I never really even heard about Bernie when I was little, but I did hear about Rome.
Yeah. And that represents, I'll say, one of the big threads that drove this evolution. The fact that there were courses out there, and even if the people who were graduates didn't turn into bike builders, the buzz about bike building is something that you do spread far and wide. Now, there was another big thread that came on, and that was really the international thread. And that thread has to do with the fact that America in the early 1970s had a bike shortage, which is something that it had actually never had in the 100-year period that it's been around. And so what happened is big companies couldn't supply bikes. A lot of dealers were actually starting to afford a lot more bikes. Brands like Raleigh came in, and Motovicon, Peugeot, people like that. But as long as not only these big brands, but also a host of the smaller custom brands. And there two countries had a significant impact on what was going on. One is Britain, and the other is Italy. And the British connection, it has to do with a company named Whitcomb. And Whitcomb was, I guess, a medium-sized builder. You probably have a better sense about that. Chris actually came out of that experience. Ben Serrata is another person. Ben had actually asked to try to have an internship, an apprenticeship at Whitcomb, and they didn't pay him, but they did put him up, and he was there. And apparently there was somebody else. He replaced another American who was willing to work for them for free and go through their gauntlet. By the time you get there, what had happened is Whitcomb thought there was so much opportunity in America that they would open up a factory. And so they hired some people, and the two of the people that they hired were, let's get the names down there because I didn't forget, Peter Weigel, Richard Saxon, and you became part of that. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience?
It's like stepping into the Wayback Machine with Peabody. I do remember some of it. It was 1975. I'd been doing some racing and knew Peter Weigel and Richard Sachs, and I met them at some Christmas dinner or something. They said, "Oh, yeah, we're looking to hire somebody." I said, "Oh, well, that sounds interesting." At the time, I was welding on submarines in Groton, Connecticut, and that was some heavy metal to be joining, and it was kind of a fun job to do for about 4 months, but I got saved by getting hired by Peter and Richard at Whitcomb USA. So it was just a matter of showing up at their shop and saying, "I love bikes, I love to ride bikes, I love to build bikes, I love to work with my hands," and they said, "Okay, you're hired." So that's how I got the job. And they were not really into a lot of tooling. They were on a pretty tight budget, I guess, but we were building, love bikes that we had these really long, I can't remember what they were. It was like forever to file on them because they were so long. No, there was, I don't know.
Hayden's?
Hayden.
I think they were, I can kind of remember
Yeah.
seeing Hayden.
Like, oh my God, like, I'm way on to, we used to spend hours filing those things. The first time I did a filing job on one of those, it took me like 3 days or something. It was, they just kind of let me go at it, and I remember Peter going over there later and says, wow, you did a really nice job, it took you 3 days, it looks good, some potential there. So, yeah, the other thing they did was got me in this paint booth. We were painting with Emron, and Peter Weichel started having a reaction to it where he couldn't be anywhere near the odor of the paint. So I got thrown into this paint booth, and that was one of those things where I have these perfectionist tendencies, and I would go in there and I would spray down the bike, and I would just like not tolerate any orange paint, which means there's not enough paint on it. And I'd come back 5 minutes later, and the paint would literally be dripping off the frame because it was way too much on it. I had to make all those mistakes several times before I got it. Once I got it, I could go in there and do my dance and not have to think about what I was doing and lay a nice coat down. It took me a little while to get there.
Emron was tricky.
Yeah.
So you had to hand carve all your lugs?
Well, they came roughly, and we put sharper points on them and squared up the edges.
So were the Whitcombs that you built here in the U.S. exactly the same as the Whitcombs that they built over in England?
They might have started that way, and we wanted to make our own thing, so it was our own lugs and our own look.
So your own lugs, your own look. Any other, like, did you start tinkering with other things, experimenting with stuff?
We did. I got much more into that after I left and started my own company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, part of the story is in the bike boom was a boom, and it lasted till 74, 75. And the bike dealers didn't figure this out until the end of that 75 period, when they realized they had way more inventory than they should have, and so they just cut off all the manufacturers. I think the statistics show that something like 14 million bikes were built in 1974, and 6 million bikes were built in 1975. That's the big picture numbers. But I can tell you that those ratios happen throughout the whole business. And I think that spelled the end of the Whitcomb operation, didn't it?
Yeah, I left before it ended, so I don't know all the gory details of how they finally decided to pull the plug on it.
Yeah.
But, I felt the call to go to Boston. So I left them behind, and then heard when they closed that they were selling their equipment, so that was my opportunity.
So you went and bought the old Whitcomb equipment.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Cool. And then,
Yeah.
so you started. So now you're in charge of your own shop, and so tell us a little bit about what you would do to create your own bikes. In fact, you have a Slim Chance from way back when, don't
I
you?
do, yeah. It's a black and white bike that's on a stand over by that area, and it's got some nice features on it. I really I put a lot into my bikes. I know everybody says that, but I really pulled out all the stops back in those days because I was always working myself trying to figure out how to make the bikes better. Like I would think about how do my eyes see how the light is coming off the lug, and how would that inform what my next file stroke would be. I was just always trying to fine tune. And I bought myself a granite surface plate to check alignment. It's like granite is the standard in precision industries for checking really precise measurements. So I was always working myself to add whatever I could to the frame, and then of course I like to dress them up. I was doing some sterling silver stars, which I would cut out by hand and solder onto the fork rounds. And the bike that's here has my logo that actually had a jeweler engraved, and that gets soldered onto the frame. So I like to dress them up too. But my passion for precision really drove me hard, and I loved it. It fed me.
Yep. Well, that's great, and obviously you built it into a great business when you got into mountain bikes. So
Yeah.
that was a bit of a transition.
It was. The thing that prepared me the best for that was that with Chris Chan Cycles, I would get my customers in and make a completely custom frame for them. So I measure up their body dimensions, I put them on the bike they were riding, make suggestions about how to fit them better on it. Then I would measure the geometry on the bike they were riding, and back in those days, most of the bikes were made out of steel, so you had a real good idea of what the tubing was and what the wall thicknesses were. And then I would talk to the customer to ride. Sometimes I go for a ride with them, but I say, well, how do you want it to corner? How do you want it to climb? How do you want it to feel after a long ride? You know, do you want it quick handling? Do you want it snappy? How do you want it to accelerate? And so you take all these terms they would give you, like, yeah, I want it snappy, I want it whatever, stiff, and I love taking those terms and then translating those into the numbers that would provide the ride that the customer wanted. So I was armed with the reference of the geometry they were on and a sense of the tubing, and could dial in the ride just as the rider wanted, the customer wanted. So that ended up being just perfect experience for, okay, how do I make a bike feel it's a mountain bike, really a different animal, and adjust the geometry so that it climbs well, so it feels stable, so that it's got all the qualities you want for a mountain bike. That it's very different than a road bike, because usually a road bike is single purpose. You know, it's like a criterium bike or a time trial bike or a road racing bike or a touring. And with a mountain bike, I felt really fired up to, like, okay, how can we balance out the geometry and the ride qualities so that you can never have this feeling of being held back by the bike. The bike is always just right there, and you're ready to take on the next whatever is coming at you. So that was something that fired me up big time about mountain bikes, because I'd done road bikes and I felt like I had done what I wanted to do, and I was ready to make a change. And when mountain bikes came along, I just got on board so completely.
That's great history.
Yeah.
So let us talk about the other part, the other invasion, which was the Italian invasion. So can I get that?
Of course.
Back as
Chris, when was your, the beginning of your company?
I started at Whitcomb in 1975 and started my company in 77.
so Whitcomb in 75, Chris Chance in 77, and Pat Chance in 82, right?
Yeah.
Now we shouldn't be talking about the 80s; it's too late. But in any event, the other invasion was the Italian invasion, and part of the problem being in Italy in the 1970s was the Italian workers were not very productive, very stylish, but not very productive. And they had some, and one of the great names in there was Masi at the time, strong racing background. And so what ended up happening is Fiero, I'm going to say that probably, Faliero.
Probably good enough.
Yeah, it's good enough for this crowd, right? You're all Americans.
That's right.
Decided to open up a factory in California so that they could take advantage of the better workforce, and then and take advantage of the bike boom in America and avoid duties and all the other things that they did. And he hired quite an array of people who's had quite a history. How many people know of Brian Bayless? Right, and Brian is he's another one of the builders that are out there, just a fabulous craftsperson. John Simonetti built a brand called Medici, which was a very popular race bike in the 80s. Jim Cunningham started Cyclock. He was the painting guy, and I think he's finally retired, but had a long and glorious history. Dave Moulton has done all sorts of exceptional bikes, and Mario Confetti is another one of those great craftspeople. So, and it was kind of the same story as Whitcomb. They built up this factory. It was building Mazis in America. It was all great, and I think they maybe shipped a few of them back to Italy. But what happened is the bike boom became a bike bust, so they tanked. So, but that invasion helped build this explosion of American builders who were now all started out their own businesses, built their own reputations. Now, the third thread that I'd like to talk about is the engineering thread. And there are a number of people, there are three, I think, key names that affected the bike builder explosion. One is Frank Orlando, and Frank is a Schwinn guy, and I know we're not really talking too much about Schwinn, but he was a bike racer from the 1940s and 50s. He'd been at the Pan American Games. I think he was at the Olympics once or twice, and Schwinn had accumulated a number of people like that. And the idea was to bring engineering to this craft business that the Wassons had done for so many years. And he introduced the notion of silver brazing as a technique. And the concept wasn't as much the metallurgy, which is one of the real benefits of silver brazing today, is it just, if you have a heat-treated tube, it simply doesn't affect the heat treat because you're keeping the temperature low. But it was also because it was easy to clean up, and you could deal with a complicated lug so that was his contribution, and that was something that filtered out to the rest of the bike building community as Schwinn talked about, and engineers moved around, and all that sort of thing. The second, what I consider godfather is actually two people. Well, talked about Frank, and it's really a group that conspired together, they conspired apart. The frame builder was a gentleman named Sezer, and he was a metallurgist who loved bikes. He loved bike racing. He was a racer as a younger man, and so he was out in the Minnesota area, and he never lost his day job, but he started building bikes and had a good reputation. He spawned a number of people who joined the business. I think you're an example of that, right? And people that worked for him for a while. There was a company that specialized in. They were the Reynolds tube distributor in Minnesota, and that was Island Cycle. You remember Island? Oh, there we go.
I used to buy lots of stuff.
There you go. And so they actually were one of the first. They were actually the only distributor I know of that. Who else was distributing parts at that point? Anybody else?
You know, Specialized.
Senyard
was
went
doing
over in
stuff the very
75 and
beginning.
started bringing stuff
Remember
back.
getting
to
stuff
Okay.
Special at Columbus, and I think they had camping dropouts and stuff.
Okay, so Mike Senior, who
Cycle
specialized.
Imports is another one, I used to get a lot
Who
of
else?
stuff.
Cycle imports?
Cycle imports up at
Okay.
Cornish Moon, Bob Richmond.
But in the Midwest, Island
Yeah,
Cycle
Bob
was
Richmond.
was a big player, and one of the guys involved with that was Terry O'Sell, who was a longtime builder out of the Minneapolis
He
area.
was connected to Island.
And he was also connected. I think someone told me he might have been a part owner at some point. Yeah, it's all fuzzy. It's all fuzzy. And then there's Pino Baroni. Pino lived in Detroit, and he was an engineer for somewhere deep in the bowels of the auto industry, not necessarily working for the big three, but
I think he did, I think he worked for Ford or something.
Did he? Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
And so, and you can just see his face behind the bike. He never wanted to be out front. And that's the best picture anyone's been able to find of him, by the way.
Oh, wow.
But Pino was a real innovator. What you see there, second from the right, is a model of a cartridge bottom bracket with sealed bearings. And so, and that was developed in the 1960s. On the far right, he took a disc bike and made the disc bulbous, and then built the fork to go around the bulb, and then showed it to the UCI that promptly banned it. You know, it's all good. And the two of them conspired to build what was probably the very first titanium frame. And the first titanium frame, which I had, it somehow ended up in the Schwinn collection that we sold off in 1997. And I remember this titanium bike, this old, brazed, it looked kind of like a Paramount, except for it was titanium, there was no paint on it, no rust, and it'd been, at the time, 25 years old. And
Did that bike actually ever get finished? Did it get brazed completely?
yes, it was brazed
Because I
completely.
saw it tapped.
You saw it? What? How
At
did
the
you-
turn, class,
Okay.
Behringer and Pino and I'm thinking of this other guy.
Here. Yeah.
Is it?
Well, those
Forgetting his name. But they came down to this class.
Really?
With the frame. And it was just tacked together, but it was a log.
Right.
All tied. And the fork was Albert made the fork. He made a steel fork for it.
Oh, okay.
And, supposedly, this is the bike that Pino rode down the steps of the Parthenon or something crazy like that over in Italy.
He actually had one of the racers ride down the steps, and it was built up. It looked, at least from my perspective, like a just perfectly normal bike. There's no paint on it. It's awfully old to be like this. So anyway, so that was an example of another one of the godfathers, because he really started, probably did more to really get people excited about new materials than anything else. Now, that kept on moving on. The third godfather, and there are certainly more out there if we had time to search for them. The third godfather is Joost Brandt. And actually, the guy who's going to know more about Joost Brandt is Tom Ritchey. So I'm going to hand it over to him. Tell us about what it was like meeting Joost and how you developed a relationship and how he affected your thinking about the world.
First off, I think Pino made at least the stem for Merck's for his hour record. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I remember that titanium stem.
Is it hard to listen through a mic? Would it be easier if I talked to you this way? Mic is better?
That's
Okay,
good.
all right.
I guess we got no
All right.
They're all getting old
sound
here.
absorbers.
Yeah. All right, well, the idea of giving you, the story behind, with me and Joost is shadowed by a number of the other people that have been mentioned here so far that are no longer with us. Half the names practically that I listened to you recite are gone. And so we live in the shadow of quite a bit recently, and actually in the last couple of years. That's great Framebuilders, great friends. So Joost was my senior about 18 years. When I met Joost, he wasn't a racer, but he was somebody of renown in the racing environment and the people in the Bay Area. And people eventually, like Lawrence Malone, who was a 5-time national cyclocross champion and writer, author, nicknamed him the Force Who Rides. And there was an article in Winning magazine that Lawrence wrote about Joost, but he was an influencer of not just myself and Peter Johnson and Bud Hoffacker and probably to some degree the other people in the Bay Area at that time. But basically Joost was a complete epic adventure cyclist. And as people that were at the top of the racing environment in that time period in the 70s, racing with names that you probably all recognize. Joost was very, very famous amongst those people, to the extent that we would have opportunity to race a 120-mile road race on the weekend or ride a Joost ride. And on a number of occasions, there would be a call from somebody and they would say, hey, what are you going to do this weekend? Well, I think I was going to ride Patterson Pass, but, there's a Joost ride. And of course, we all leaned toward riding the race, but the other question was always, I'm not sure I'm in shape to ride a Joost ride.
With a 120-mile race.
Yeah, versus a 120-mile race. So, I was 15 at the time when I met you. I was 14 probably, right at the end of my 14th year as a ninth grader. And when my dad had just come back from a ride with Joost, in which for, 10 hours or 8 hours probably, through the Santa Cruz Mountains, there's all kinds of pavement that's wonderful, all kinds of fire roads and trails and all that are connecting and making loops out of things. And Joost was kind of the master navigator. He knew where these places were, and he knew what it took to do them, whether he was alone or whether he was with people. And the idea of going on a Yoke's ride was intimidating. And there was, depending upon which ride he was choosing, he didn't really know until usually the day before the day. But some rides would be just 100-mile rides. Other rides would be 150-mile rides with 50 miles of dirt. And those rides were the kind of rides that you would really test yourself, of course. But the other thing you would test is your equipment. And Yost was very, very, very concerned about your equipment. He had his own maintenance, what do you call them?
Regiment.
No, maintenance weekday at his house where everyone would come and bring their wheels to repair, their tires to repair, and everything. And Yost was very aware of everyone's condition, not just physically, but on their bikes, and helping them in his own way, which usually meant a lecture, a beratement, some kind of thing that made you feel very small. Conversation, and then an obedience that followed that. And I didn't fit into that. So I was a little bit on the outside of Yost's, I think it was Tuesday night fix-it parties. I don't even know if I ever went to one of them. But he needed to do that. The rides were that epic that if you were going to come, you were going to need to have your bike checked out. How many people here have been on Yost rides? We have one David Perry.
Wednesday.
Hello, David. How are you doing? David, you understand all this, right? Yeah, David was national senior road champion, and he knows what it took to finish a Yost ride, and basically to be under the control, somewhat, in a loose way, of Yost ride. Anyway, the long and the short of it was that it was a time in the Bay Area, it was a time that the valley wasn't called Silicon Valley. The valley was a valley of very, very talented people of just about every imaginable discipline. Whether it be us as cyclists riding at national level, engineers developing the tools for all the technology that we enjoy, the aerospace industry and Lockheed and McDonald, Fairchild. The whole valley was full of very, very creative people, including the whole music industry and just other industries. And so the juices, the creative juices that I was in the middle of were very, very, I would say, healthy for me as a very young person. And a person like Yost was right in the middle of that when it came to cycling. So I would say the only other, of course, being under his shadow was a big thing. And myself and Peter Johnson and a few others that were Bill Robertson, and if I'm forgetting anyone, David.
Frame builders?
Who?
Other frame people?
Frame were just people that were on the rides. But anyway, the three of us, Robertson, Johnson, and myself, were Category 1 racers, and the national team, I developed with David and others, developed ourselves into national cyclists. And some of us were into creating things. And so if you're 15 years old, and Yost is 40 years old, and he's worked for Porsche, he's worked for Hewlett-Packard, he's a renowned engineer, you're going to get you're gonna get an education. And you're gonna get somewhat of a loud and everyone can hear rebuke if something you were doing was not Yoast approved. So, if you can imagine, I was not Yoast approved in the very beginning. It took a while. Because at 15 years old, I wanted to go off the chart and do my own thing. And Yoast was very much concerned about Mr. Ritchey, Tommy, doing his own thing. And explaining to me all the downside of doing your own thing. And in the course of a year or so of doing my own thing and showing off on Yoast rides and riding with David and the others, and having very few mechanical problems, and even having some things that probably worked out better than Yoast predicted.
Hypothesized.
On top of that, yeah. It ended up working out for me. It ended up, I think, working out for Peter and others. Because Yoast's advice was very sound. It was very much the advice of somebody who'd been there, done that, broken that, had probably the foremost reputation breaking every part that anyone broke on bikes. Multiple cranks, actions, bottom brackets, particularly the rear axle on the bicycle, the can't be quick release axle, he would break regularly. And anyway, all the while explaining the beginning of the crack, how the crack formed, what the consequence of a left-right thread was, all the things that a young fledgling engineer was just like mouth opened about, like understanding these things and how to not have them happen to you. So, if you can imagine, it not just worked out well in terms of building a better bike for myself, building a better frame, or innovating, playing around with my own way of doing things. But in the beginnings of making components, which was very much something that I did in parallel with building my first frame. I built my first stem and some other parts very soon after building my first bike. So these kind of things leave an indelible mark on your head. And if you're in an environment where you have somebody that's willing to give you to give you your comeuppance and challenge you and challenge you and challenge you and give you mechanical and metallurgical and other kinds of ideas of what it is that's going on with the metal and why it's failing, the difference between aluminum and steel, and why aluminum is basically vulnerable to fatigue cracking in a completely different way, especially in a weld zone. You end up forming a very personal, strong opinion at a very young age, and you build things in a certain way as a result. So anyway, it's a long conversation to talk about Yoast Brad. There's a lot of stories, a lot of anecdotes.
Thank you. That's a wonderful tribute from somebody that clearly we can see that in parts that we built through the years and techniques you use in Framebuilding. That's really been superb. All of these different forces, the racing side, the craftsmanship side, the international influences, the influences of engineering, were things that help feed this boom. And I think there's also the strong competitive spirit, people feeding off of one another. I mean, there are relatively few patentable items in a bike, but there's an enormous amount of know-how. And so that know-how is what gets transferred. You go to a bike show, you learn things, now you're going to bring it back home and turn it into something better. And it actually, this is a shot of Albert from 1987. He's featured on Bicycle Magazine, and there's a Tom Ritchey frame in there, and a number of other names that we recognize. And so all of these threads in the road bike side peaked at that side, but obviously we also saw the same kind of energy going into the mountain bike business. And actually what came out of this explosion has really been a real transformation of the bike business in terms of technology and everything else. Mountain bikes are probably the first radical transformation from what the builders, what the people who were building came up with. And but you know, triathlon bikes, these are totally revolutionized by aerodynamic studies, the scientific studies, and everything else, biomechanical studies. The materials explosion may have started with Pino and Cecil, but it didn't stop there, and that's a huge part of what goes on. Component design continues to evolve, and in fact, I will say that we can build a bike today that is still compatible with 50 years ago, but not nearly as easily when you consider things like the headset choices that we have, bottom brackets, brakes, everything that's out there. Although I will say the English Thread survives and is continuing to thrive. But what's that?
It's hanging on.
It's hanging on, and I think we'll see other technologies that have been important in the past. They're not going to go away, but we certainly have a much broader world. So I think that gives us a little flavor for what the explosion is all about. So I'm going to say thank you very much for the opportunity to share that with you. But I'm going to open up to the audience if anybody has any questions about yeah.
Curious when the mountain biking begin.
When did the mountain bike begin? You know, there has been a long argument about who created the first mountain bike and what it really meant. And actually, Tom, your description of Yo's brand and taking you on 50 miles of fire roads had to fire a few things up there.
Let me try not to be too long-winded about this.
Okay.
Okay.
Should I get the stopwatch out?
Yeah, you can get it out. Tell me how much that meant.
I mean, we all have
an opinion, and depending upon where we lived, I'm sure Chris has his opinion where he started seeing things happen, but my feeling is that early adopters, people that had the idea, the concept, and of riding off-road were well in existence when I came on the scene in 1972. There was a guy named John Finley Scott who practically every year that I was racing and building a bike, he came up to me and said, "Ritchey, you need to build a woodsy bike." And in his world, in his mind, it already existed. And he had a bike that came out of England by the Rough Stuff Fellowship, and he had modified it, and he had already, kind of ridden it all over the place, and it was seen, and people didn't care. People were thinking about other things. And I'm sure that there's other examples before that, but that was the 60s. And then in Cupertino, my backyard, before the Marin repack, before any of these races happened, there was the Moro Dirt Club. And they were high school kids taking Schwinn or Schwinn-type, Excelsior-type bikes and putting trailers on them. And then they showed up in Marin in 1974 at the National Cyclocross Championships. And they just came out of the blue. No one had heard about them. No one had any idea who they were. They showed up at a race with a bunch of guys that looked totally different than they looked, riding on cross bikes. And they finished the race and packed up and went home, and only a few people noticed them, namely Joe Breeze and Gary Fisher.
Well, they count.
So there's a lot going on in terms of people's creative, making something that works for them and in a creative way, executing it. And for me, it was different. For me, it was riding with Yos and having my experiences off road in a probably the way that you look at
people that were starting to ride off-road, well, maybe Gary Helfrich was riding off-road some, and
Cruisers.
cruisers, yeah. Yeah.
26-inch cruisers.
Yeah.
From LA.
Yeah, there's a lot that was drawn from BMX, you know, we
Yeah.
paid attention to what was going on in BMX.
Redline.
Yeah.
The 26-inch wheel,
Yeah.
you know, 26-inch wheel BMX bikes is what kind of got the mountain bike thing going.
Yep.
At least as far as mountain bike wheels go.
Yeah, Mark was just saying that the 26-inch wheel BMX bike was a great platform to launch the mountain bike from. And, yeah, I think we were a little behind what's going on in California for sure, on the East Coast, but the East Coast was sure ready for it. You know, when we got started up. We
Kept
just-
you business.
Yeah, it kept us really busy. And, yeah, I remember early on, we used to do these things we called fat tag. It was long before emails and texting and stuff. We'd have to do these phone trees and call all our friends and say, okay, it's your fat chance, we're gonna show up at this event, and like half the bikes there would be fat chances, which was, that could never happen.
Well, and I think a lot of this is really all about the spirit of tinkering. There wasn't a single inventor. There's just like, you know, there are developments in there. It's a matter of testing.
Yeah, I feel like the
Well,
mountain bike was.
Victor Vincente was another one of the pioneers in
Victor Vincente, huh?
Vincente, yeah.
Vincente, okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get too Italian here.
From my perspective.
Michael Hiltner
at
was
least-
his name. He was
What's
he was
that?
on the national.
I'm just gonna say, from my perspective, the mountain bike was something that was gonna come, you know, it was like bubbling and percolating in various places around the country, especially in California. There was, you know, people trying it out, and it was something that was gonna happen, you know. I feel really fortunate that I got to be part of, what happened here on the East Coast, and, it was so much excitement in those early years, it was just such a blast.
Yeah.
All that exploring we did.
Any other questions then? Yeah.
Can I ask questions a little bit more, slightly more current than the 70s, but what was the impact? So we've got like steel frame building legends, but what happened when aluminum, like when Easton Elite came in, say like late 80s, like how did that affect the steel, high-end steel market? Did it, I mean, in the racing, like the athlete market?
Yeah,
Yes.
how did the introduction of Easton aluminum tubing,
High-end, yeah.
high-end tubing, which is 7,000 series tubing probably, in the late 80s affect
steel.
the market, the steel market?
Yeah.
And
My experience with that was we started getting a lot of customers who were asking, they really just wanted to know what's the bike weigh? They would call us up and say, what's your bike weigh? And we would say, well, you know, our bikes are made out of steel or titanium. And they weigh what they weigh, but it's all balanced out with how the bike performs. You know, it's very durable, it handles well, it's lively. It's got all these qualities that support you when having the best experience you can have on a bike. And you know, some people can listen to that. Some people were more about, well, I just need a lightweight bike to impress my friends. You know? So there's all kinds of customers out there. We just like to work with educated people, and for me, aluminum was something that more defined how the bike had to handle because it's got such poor fatigue resistance. The bike needs to be stiffer, and as a frame designer, I don't want the material to tell me that it has to be stiff. I want to be able to build in whatever supple feel or however I want the bike to handle. And so we never got into aluminum. And I think that's mostly okay for our customers, and it's done as well. Of course, we have titanium, which is pretty fabulous material we're willing to pay for.
now,
There was, as going back to the Yokes conversation, there was a deeply held belief and backed with all kinds of engineering input to me early on that aluminum, welded aluminum, was a big mistake on a bike frame. And to give you any kind of comfort factor, all the aluminum companies, Cannondale, you name it, used a steel fork. It really wasn't until the suspension fork that took and actually the suspension fork in combination with the oversized steering column that started around 90, that took the edge out of aluminum product braking that time, steel had already started to suffer a lot of death knells to the popularizing of the big down tube of Cannondale, which was the biggest billboard in the industry and made everyone else so insecure that they also had to have the same size billboard. So really, aluminum won for marketing reasons, not for practical reasons.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us for this event. I want to thank our panelists here, Mark Nobilette, and Chris James. It has been an honor to be on the stage with you and to learn all the great lessons that we've learned today. This has been a great experience for us. I hope that it has been as rewarding for you. Thank you very much for coming.